Nina Chase, welcome to the How Humans Work podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. It's great to have you.
Yeah.
I'm excited to have you here and to talk about society through your work as a landscape architect.
Yeah.
And but before we go there, I just want to see how you are today. How's your day going?
It's been good. I feel like, I don't know, election night last night, some good positive
Uh-huh.
results here on the East Coast. So that was exciting and glimmer of hope, I think. So feeling
Yes.
good. Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Good. Yeah, we were
Yeah.
a few of us last night were gathered at my house for a poetry reading.
Mm. Mm.
And it was a memorial. This
Mm.
wonderful woman who's an amazing poet. We're in a poetry group together. Nora Holmgren wrote 12 sonnets for her late
Mm.
granddaughter,
Oh my
and
gosh.
we did a reading of them. And there was about 15, 20 of us gathered, and we lit some candles, and it was very beautiful. And maybe
Mm.
I'll end the show with one of the poems because I have them here. But it was very profound.
Yeah.
Now it's raining. Definitely falls here, and it's early on the West
Yeah.
Coast. And I want to give a shout out to Ben Loffer, who brought us together. And Ben's brought in a few guests, but I just wondered if, for people who don't know, Ben helps out with the podcast. He's amazing. He's a fantastic guy. He's a music teacher, a musician. But what's the goods on Ben that people should know about from early life?
Ben is one of my oldest friends.
Yeah.
He is my first love, my first crush, actually in fifth,
Aw.
not yeah, fifth grade,
Wow.
and we have been friends since fifth grade.
Uh-huh.
So one of my
That's
oldest
amazing.
friends. We grew up in West Virginia, and we've stayed in touch, and we both went to college together, and we've just stayed connected. Our families are connected
Yeah.
still, and it's just a lifelong friendship. Yeah.
That's beautiful. What's consistent about Ben's temperament that was evident when he was in fifth grade?
Oh my God. Ben has always been like a cool kid, I think.
Uh-huh.
He's always been very like everybody loves Ben. And I think that that translates to his teaching now and his ability to
Yeah.
connect with students. And um,
Beautiful.
he's just a great positive guy.
Yeah. He is. He's great. He's positive and he's lovable. I agree on all that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Ben. Got you. Got you on the show. Okay.
Shout out to Ben.
So shout out to Ben. Ben's been super great and helpful. Okay. And so this is a pivot. A lot of shows I mentioned to you when we talked a couple weeks ago that a lot of it's human nature. And so I'm excited to
Hmm.
look at human nature through the work of landscape architecture and designing common spaces, public spaces that foster society. So, what do you know
Yeah.
about humans, or what when you think about human life and human society from your lens as a landscape architect developing these public spaces? What do you know and what do you think? What comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. We think a lot about how people gather together. So, as a landscape architect, you can do lots of different types of design work. As a landscape architect, you can work on small gardens. You can work for universities on big campuses, and the work that I do and our team does is a lot for municipal clients, so cities on public landscapes like big public parks or waterfront projects. Um, Trail projects, places that have large spaces for gathering. And so we're always thinking about what brings people together and why, and what keeps people apart also to avoid that to avoid that in our spaces, and making sure that we create spaces outside that really facilitate people coming together and feeling like they belong in a space, that there's an invitation to be together or by yourself, but just an invitation to be in a space and feel that it represents you, maybe not only you, but also your vision of a community that you live in, and that allows everybody to feel comfortable um, in these public spaces, which are technically owned by all of us because our tax dollars are what create them, and it's public land, and so that kind of is the grounding of all of our majority of our work.
Mhm. Yeah. And what are some of the elements? Obviously, different. I was looking at the portfolio of pictures you have on your website, Merritt Chase. Just
Hmm.
give that a shout out right now. It's
Thanks. Yeah.
meritchase.com. Yep. two R's, two T's in the merit. And um, and I was just looking. There's so many different elements and different types of spaces, little nooks and cities along the riverfronts, like you mentioned. So, what are some of the elements that you know that help people maybe feel like they can stop and spend time in a public space, or draw people in and pull people together?
Yeah. I'm gonna specifically talk about shade because I am a creature who loves shade. As a redhead, I have
Uh
to be very careful. So I think a lot
Yeah.
about shade, but maybe
Uh-huh.
that relates more to just comfort in general, like what makes people comfortable. And often, being in the shade, especially in places, climates that are warmer, or when you're outside in. So I'm based in Pittsburgh, so in the warmer months, but also good places to sit. Picnic tables that are just spots for people to come together, different types of seating. That's a big piece of it. Like you don't want just benches without backs on them all over the place. You want some benches to have backs, some benches not to have backs, armrests, picnic tables, movable tables and chairs, some areas to sit where you're more kind of out and visible for people to see, but other people like to be a little bit more like recede into the background and along the edges. And so creating a lot of options because, I might like one thing, you might like one thing in a space, but everybody has their own preferences. So we try to create a real diversity of options in the physical forms or physical objects that
Hmm.
we're kind of putting together in parks. And so then that helps just provide people choice and that allows people to feel the most comfortable and make that decision for themselves.
Hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then to get maybe into some particulars, like a particular project and some of the design elements,
Hmm.
maybe we could like look at those features. So one of the projects maybe
Yeah.
you're working on, you worked on, can you start to talk about the design elements that you are how you bring diversity into a specific space? And maybe
Yeah.
we could try something that's more nature oriented and then something that's a little bit more urban and kind of look at
Yeah.
those
Yep.
dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's also something that's unique about the work we do is some work is very rural and it's more recreation based, like trails that have a certain width to them where you want to have more space for people to walk comfortably, but then they get a little more narrow when you have a little less space and it's more just like one person or two people walking on a trail. For those more rural projects, we often look a lot at kind of the gateway moments, like where do people come in first, where you're parking your car or you're getting off the bus and walking, and you have to like find the start of a park or a trail in a more kind of wild place. And so we think a lot about the elements of a gateway, which are usually signage. Maybe there are trash cans, some of the mundane things that we deal with, but
Yeah.
trash cans, signage. Maybe there's a little stone wall or a fence that kind of indicates a passage and kind of a portal to go from where you are right now into something else, like a trail or a more naturalized park setting. And
Would that be
then,
like an arch or
um,
something? We were just in London and there's,
yeah,
these old parks
yeah,
have all these
definitely,
old features to them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Arches, walls, gates themselves, like the act of opening a gate and kind of feeling like you're really moving through a space and going from one place to another and making that shift mentally, I think is a really big part of what creates very comfortable, attractive spaces for people that are more rural and wild. And even in Pittsburgh, where I am, we've been working on the Emerald View Regional Park Master Plan. We completed it a couple years ago, but it's one of the regional parks in Pittsburgh, which are the bigger. There are 5 regional parks in Pittsburgh, and Emerald View feels like you're in the middle of Appalachia somewhere in most parts. Like it's just totally wild, lots of giant trees, and you're on these steep hillsides, and you're walking along these trails, and there are like deer hunting stands that are not legal, but they're there, and you could be anywhere. Like it feels like West Virginia, where I grew up in many parts, and then you turn a corner, and there's just this like opening and a view of downtown Pittsburgh, and you see the skyline of downtown Pittsburgh, and so it's just like these wacky shifts in scale, but very cool because you're just in the middle of the city and it feels very wild
Yeah.
and rustic. And then we do a lot of work too I would say a majority of our work is more like urban park and plaza projects. And so right now we have a couple projects in Pittsburgh where I'm based, and then Indianapolis where my business partner is based and the other half of our office is based, where we're working in more of the entertainment districts of the cities. So in
Yeah.
Pittsburgh where the Pirates play baseball, PNC
What is
Park
that?
and
Three?
where
Yeah.
this
Okay. PNC. Yeah. PNC Park.
yeah,
That's right.
PNC, it's PNC, and then what used to be Heinz Field, I won't say the new name. It's just less exciting. But Steelers play where they play down in that area. We've been working on a
Yeah.
big plaza for the Pirates specifically. That's going to be an event plaza for tailgating when there are big games and concerts and things. But then it also has to really function as a community space day to day. And so for that, we have to make a very flexible space. So it has a lot of open space. It's a large paved plaza, but then
Mm-hmm.
we really worked hard to make sure we got big trees so that day one it's shaded, it feels comfortable. The trees give you a sense of scale and kind of nature to a space that feels otherwise kind of hard. And then we are working with there's a restaurant on the ground floor, and we're working with them to provide lots of movable tables and chairs and big umbrellas. And then we just think a lot about the edges of those spaces too. So again, you're kind of there's a transition from when you move from PNC Park to the streetscape, the existing street, and then into this space. There's a nice edge with planting and different types of benches
Yeah.
and platforms.
So
Yeah.
I was going to ask how you mark those thresholds in the urban environment. So it sounds like some plants,
Yeah.
planters, benches, or things that have
Yeah.
some fixity or like a stone. Like I'm thinking about Ireland right now,
Yeah.
ancient
Yep.
stones where it's like,
Yep.
okay, I'm
Yep.
walking. Okay, here's a
And
stone that means
marks.
something. Yes.
Yep.
So those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yep, absolutely. And for these projects in bigger areas where you have large crowds, we have to think a lot about circulation flow and how people are moving through a space and not wanting to create bottlenecks, but also not wanting to have these spaces feel too big. Because if there isn't a crowd, you don't want it to feel empty. And so there's a kind of sweet spot for some of the widths of the paths and the kind of entry points that you have.
Okay, detail. Do you like in your planning? You're like, oh, there's going to be 8,000 people walking through this space at 2 miles an hour for 40 minutes or
Yeah.
something. Are you getting that granular with like numbers and calculations?
We do. We get more granular with numbers when we're thinking about assembly. So when people are getting together in a crowd, we have to do certain calculations for zoning code regulation around how much space you are providing and bathrooms. That's like the big thing is like how many toilets are you providing? How many fixtures
Yes.
are you providing for people?
Yes.
So that's a big part of
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
And just understanding those counts. And then we do a lot of like simulations of like, okay, if I'm parked here and I need to get from here to here, how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
What's the most efficient route? What would be
Yes.
a route that might be a little slower but more interesting? And so we kind of map those things out.
Yeah. Is there, it's coming up, so I'm going to ask, is there any kind of like
Yeah.
funny name of counting or calculation that happens in your field? You're like, we call it this, and it's like the urine flow of how many people are,
I don't think so. It's a good question, though.
I know. I'm like,
I
there's
haven't
gotta
heard
be
of
something
anything.
funny about this. We
Yeah.
talk about, in the trade, we talk about it this way.
Yeah.
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 Totally.
Unfortunately,
all right.
it's pretty,
Yeah.
the zoning stuff's pretty dry, but yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think that there is an element where I do want to talk about the government interaction and the creation of spaces, but I'm more interested right now in the sense that you're thinking about that experience. Like I felt like I was with you in the Pittsburgh park that's like Appalachian, all of a sudden the view, and the drama of that and the contrast or the thresholds in the sense that, people are experiencing things and there are signatures that help people relate. Shade, for instance, comfort, or markers that help and guide people, and the sensitivity to what it feels like, what's it feel like to be a part of this city? What's it feel like to be a part of this space? And how can we foster and engender that? And because I'm in the healing arts, I think about that experience as a form of healing in a way. And I don't know if that's
Absolutely.
language that you all think about, or you're thinking like, how can we build a more cohesive relationship between the natural wild world and the urban environment in this way? So maybe talk a little bit about any philosophical trends or groundwork that's emerging in the field of landscape architecture, which is trying to foster healthy nervous systems. I don't know if you talk about it at that level, but on the
Yeah,
psychology and the healing system, we're talking about nervous systems all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about public health and the public health benefits of parks and just being out in nature and making sure people have access to nature. And so, a big thing is for us is access to nature, and that can be measured in different ways, but one way, most cities have a kind of walk shed for each of their parks, and the goal is always to have everybody within a 10-minute walk shed of a park, and that's not always the case. In Pittsburgh, only 67% of the population is within 10-minute walk to a park, and that has a lot to do with topography because it's very steep here. But
Okay.
that's something we think a lot about is access to parks. And then once you're in the park, like, I mean, there's so many studies that, and you, I imagine, are familiar with them about just how beneficial it is to be in and amongst trees and planting and creating just that, like, space to calm your nervous system and to have that be of substantial acreage in an urban setting where you go from a place that's very hard and gray and concrete, and then you're able to transition into something that feels
Mm.
so much nicer. I mean, even just for my own self, we have a really large cemetery just down the street from us, and in the middle of the summer, if you walk down the street and go into that cemetery, it's like 10 degrees cooler, the air is cleaner, like, it just feels, you just have this, like, sense of calm and contentment, and
Yeah.
it's such an enormous shift. And so we talk a lot about that, just the value of that for public health and just livelihoods, especially because a lot of our work is in urban settings. Um, we also talk, just to your question about trends, the other big trend is, you know, we're designing landscapes for people, but we also design landscapes for animals a lot. And so thinking about habitat for humans, but habitat for species that we know are maybe declining in certain areas, or creating habitat for specific species like different types of birds and butterflies and different insects. And so
Mm.
we're always thinking about how to best support different, of real wide diversity of ecosystems as well. There are some firms that specialize in designing underwater landscapes, and some that, you know, are very much focused on habitat regeneration, and they're
Mm.
and more ecologically focused. I'd say we're kind of in the middle. It's not our, like, main objective on our projects, but it's always something that we're baking into our work because we're in typically more urban settings. So how do we bring a little bit of that into our
Yeah.
projects?
So give an example of where that is alive in one of your projects, a certain maybe insect,
Yeah,
bird, or
I mean,
mammal.
yeah, well, one of the projects we're working on is, actually, oh, yeah, this is, the one of the images of the project. It's in Pittsburgh. It's a big pedestrian and cyclist ramp that's gonna connect to, one of the major bridges in Pittsburgh, and when we were doing this work, the eclipse happened, and I had been following this woman who's an ecological, she's an ecologist and a designer, and she talked about, um, wait, what did she call it? Dawn. Oh shoot, I'm gonna forget what it's called. Um, Dawn. Okay, so I was following the work of this woman who's an ecologist, and she's a landscape architect, an educator, and an ecologist. And she, during the eclipse, had highlighted the effect of dawn chorus, which is when dawn is happening during a normal day, animals are waking up and they go from being very quiet to being very loud, and so there's this chorus and a kind of cacophony of sound of animals.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
during an eclipse, this happens too. When the sun gets blocked, the animals get very quiet and then they get really loud right away because it's kind of mimicking dawn.
Yeah.
And one of the things we heard during the engagement, we do a lot of public engagement for projects. And one of the things we heard for this project is that a lot of people commute on the West End Bridge, which is the bridge that these ramps are connecting to, at sunrise and sunset for their commutes. And so they're going to work and they're watching the sunrise over the skyline of Pittsburgh, or they're coming home and they're watching the sunset over the rivers. And this idea of dawn chorus, of like hearing the city wake up, one, the animals, but also the people, was part of
Yeah.
the concept for us in thinking about how to create more habitat here, and picking native trees, native plants, specifically for native species here in Pittsburgh. The specific birds and the I don't have the list in front of me, but we do have
Yeah.
a full
Yeah.
list. But it was also
Uh-huh.
about butterflies and just like
Mhm.
having the space really come alive. And because
Mhm.
people were saying that this was the meaningful time of the day for them, trying to highlight that more and create a really special moment during those
Mm.
kind of sunrise,
Mm.
sunset
Oh,
time frames.
beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I love the relatedness of each feature and timing and season and year
Mm,
and shade. It's very
mhm,
cool. I've done some bike commuting, and it's really a great
mhm.
way to commute. It really is
Oh,
the
it's the
most
best.
it's the
Biking is
best.
It's the most
Go.
joyous form of transportation, and I was not a big biker. I just got an e-bike last year, and in Pittsburgh, if you don't have an e-bike, you have to be like kind of a hardcore cyclist because the hills are really steep and they're great bike lanes, but often you're on the road and it can be tough. And I just got this e-bike last year, and it has like transformed my life. My life
Yes.
because it's just so
Yeah.
joyful and fun, and like you get everywhere so fast, but you've had fun doing it and you're not in a
Yeah.
car. It's great. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. My wife and I were hanging out in London, and we used the Lime bikes, and we're just cruising all over London.
Yeah.
It's such a fun, fast way. And it's that exposure to it. So I imagine you're learning things through just being in the landscape on a bike, which is a completely different thing.
Mhm.
The relatedness though that of all these elements of, the golden hours, and having that. And I'm tuning a little bit into the soundscape because I think this is
Mm.
always one of the most interesting dynamics of urban life is just the sound and the
Uh,
stress of different sounds. Um,
yeah.
what do you know about that?
I would say we don't talk a lot about sound. I think about sound a lot because I'm like a super sensitive sound person. So if it's really loud or if there's a lot going on, I get very like overstimulated. So I personally think a lot about sound. I wouldn't say it's like a driving feature of our projects, but it is something that we're aware of. And I think, especially when we're thinking about planting, like thinking about wind and rustling and like that kind of component as a piece to the design story. But yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's like the main driver of our work, but it's definitely like a more subtle layer. Um, and I think we happen to just work on a lot of projects that touch really big vehicular infrastructure. So this project I was just mentioning on the West End Bridge, it's loud because it's a highway. So creating spaces that are like little tiny pockets of respite within a very loud space is something we just end up working on a lot. I think it's kind of a product of our focus is on kind of middle America, so Midwest, Appalachia, Rust Belt, and there's a lot of old infrastructure and a lot of car specific infrastructure, and we're always kind of getting linked into things like that. So they're
Yeah.
they're loud pieces of landscapes.
Let's talk about that part of America right now. I think that's interesting because I know
Yeah.
that Cincinnati's kind of had a renaissance and Detroit's has some kind of
Hmm.
renaissance
Yeah.
energy, and there's these old steel country, basically these old
Hmm.
industrial centers they went empty and quiet for a while, and there's a reinvigoration. Is that something that you feel
Hmm.
aware of and kind of can speak to?
Definitely. I mean, it's the reason why I moved to Pittsburgh. It's why my business partner is back in Indianapolis, and we started our practice. We really started our firm with a mission to design public landscapes for what we call Middle America because we feel like all of these places really deserve excellent design. And we had both spent, I'm from West Virginia originally. My business partner, Chris Merritt's from the Indianapolis area, but we met in the Boston area and we spent a long time working for a much bigger national firm up in the Boston area. And my joke is that like Boston's going to be fine. Like there are enough landscape architects and designers out there working in that
Yeah.
city. It's going to be great. And I truly feel like there are just not enough landscape architects in Middle America. There are really wonderful landscape architects who are colleagues and friends of ours, but we need more. And so we started our practice because we just feel like we need more great thinking around public landscapes and public land in these places. And so for us, that meant having we have two offices. I'm in Pittsburgh, he's in Indianapolis. We have small teams in each, and we very specifically work on projects in our region. And so Pittsburgh, Indy, Cleveland, we do a lot of work in Cleveland. Um, Columbus, Indiana. We've done some work in Detroit, but basically those three cities, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Indy, and smaller towns in between. And it for us has allowed us. It allows us to say no to projects that don't make sense. It keeps also our life manageable because both of us and many of our team members have families and like little kid families, and so usually our our determination if we like go after a project or not is if it's within a direct flight or a 5-hour drive. Like those are our kind of points of
Uh-huh.
decision
Yeah.
making, and
Yeah.
it helps keep our it helps keep our lives together and manageable. And it also, because we live in these places, these are the spaces that we get to use on a daily basis. They're the spaces that have impacted our lives. Like one of our first projects was the riverfront in Morgantown, West Virginia, where Ben and I grew up, and it was one of the
Uh-huh.
first public landscapes that I really used as a kid. And so to be able to come back and help with the design of that and the kind of reinvention of that for the next generation was just so meaningful. And
Uh-huh.
similarly in Pittsburgh, getting to work on all these spaces that my friends get to use, my family gets to use, like it's just very meaningful. And so for us, that has meant very focused practice in this region.
Wow. That's amazing. I love that. I love the vision of it. Obviously the time, maybe you and your younger body cruising around this
Yeah,
waterfront and then
yeah,
maturing up
yeah,
and being
yeah.
like, oh, let's revision this. And but more than that, I mean, the whole relatedness, the whole many layers of relationship around public spaces and the creation and
Hmm.
the web, though just the web of relationships there is
Yeah.
very, very fascinating. I didn't expect it to be this interesting in my mind. It's like, wow, look at
Mm.
this. This is creation. This is the creative process in this collective way.
Yeah.
Um, but I also appreciate the Middle America renewal spirit. And so to
Mm.
talk about some of the things that you feel like you've seen or you're seeing happening in your zone of work where you're like, this renewal is doing this or bringing people
Yeah.
together, particularly for communities that have struggled maybe with change,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely it's a very real part of it, and the idea is not to like create something for people from somewhere else to come and use. It's real. We're very intentional about a lot of people have stayed in these cities and places and have committed to them and dedicated themselves to them, and so creating space to support those communities, and with those people, I mentioned we do a lot of public engagement, and so we're even though I'm in Pittsburgh, like if we go to a certain neighborhood, I'm not the expert on that neighborhood. The residents who live there are, and so creating spaces with them and designing not only the end project but the process to get to that end project with
Mhm.
a full community,
Yeah.
and with different stakeholders is very much part of that. I would also say one of the things that just always strikes me about uh, uh, Pittsburgh in general and Middle America is that there is so much space. Like there's a true abundance of land, and that's part of why these cities function the way they did, basically being the breadbasket or the like, industrial powerhouses of the United States, built making all the materials that then made everything like the and one we always talk about steel in Pittsburgh. There's limestone in Indianapolis and Indiana. Both of those things came together to build the Empire State Building, and so yeah, the Golden Gate Bridge is actually built with Pittsburgh steel, and so it's like it's everywhere, and it's yeah. And because of the expansiveness of the land, during the Industrial Revolution, it was really exploited for that purpose. And now it's kind of like coming back and repairing a lot of that exploitation and the extraction, the natural resource extraction, especially in West Virginia, is still happening. But, there's been a lot of repairing of that and thinking of how to think about that for the next generation and more. But that abundance of land is amazing, and it allows for an opportunity of experimentation for so many young professionals. And so for us also, as a small firm, we were able to work on projects that there would have been no way we would have gotten if we were competing against the 50 other landscape architects in the Boston area if we
Yeah.
were to have stayed in the Boston area.
Yeah.
Um, and that sense of experimentation, and there's just a like willingness to try that have always found very encouraging and inspiring. Real estate's so much less expensive here, so people can open restaurants and have a recording studio or a small landscape architecture practice, and the
Yeah.
like barriers to entry are so much lower because there's
Mm.
just it's more accessible and affordable. And I think
The Chamber
it's
of
an issue
Commerce is
across.
loving you right now. You're doing a
Yeah, right, right.
great,
I know. I'm always like,
you're a
but
great
it's true.
ambassador
Like,
right
I mean,
now. I
I
believe you.
joke
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
it was Chris and I. Now we have a team of 8, and we've like, brought people back to their home
Yeah.
region. Many
Yeah.
of the folks we work with every day on our team are
Yeah.
people who are from these places who went somewhere else and then came back. And
Yeah.
um, now we have more voters also.
Yeah. That's great. And that's
We're just
but it's also a
repopulating. Yeah.
but it is beautiful because I do hear the restoration both of this social structure, in
Yeah.
terms of people feeling like the habitat works or it has value, things, different values, but also the relationship with nature. I am curious, and it just slipped through. Let's see. Is there research around like, okay, yeah, we can see the quality of life. We've added these 4 parks to Pittsburgh or West Virginia, and we can say, oh, the satisfaction indexes are like people are
Hmm.
popping up. Is there that level of data on it yet that you're aware of?
I don't. It's hard to quantify, and maybe if there's a
Hmm.
way to quantify it. I'm not sure, but I feel like that's not something as a profession landscape architects have done well, is quantify that more
Yeah.
qualitative benefit. We've been in a whole kick over the last, I would say, 15 years as a profession at large of quantifying the benefits of stormwater management, trees, CO2, thinking about habitat regeneration, amount of stormwater captured and kept without it just running off into, a river. And that's been these metrics that are being applied to all of our work. I feel like that there are better ways to
Yeah.
track the
Yeah.
impact, but like the more qualitative impacts, I feel like I don't know how to do that. And I would love to
Yeah.
incorporate that more. I feel
I,
like the public health piece is a piece that people talk about because it is
yeah.
like, years of life or air quality and stuff like
Exactly.
that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I wonder with the health data metrics of like Oura rings and stuff like that, if over time they could be like,
Yeah.
hey, we noticed this
Mm,
increase in activity, and you know,
that'd be
it'll be
interesting.
interesting to see where it
Yeah.
all converges. But I do feel similar. I do feel like I would need to honor you as a healer. I'm like, this is healing work. This is
Oh,
really,
well, yeah.
yeah. As someone who works with people in a healing spirit, it's just like, wow, this is great to see that
Yeah.
happening in that same
To
way, and
that
it also
point,
is. Go. Yeah.
well, I was just going to say, we often also work in communities where the urban landscape had been intentionally designed to segregate people or to keep people from certain parts of a city, or roads were built through neighborhoods and just wiped out entire communities at the height of their social activity. And there's a real distrust of of planning and landscape architecture being a part of that, in the sense that there had been very real trauma associated with newly designed highways and streets and things like that. And so we're often also coming to projects where we're trying to heal physically a landscape, but also emotionally a community, because there awful things have been done to them, um, with the powers of planning. And so that's also a big part of what many of our projects tackle and grapple with. But I think that's something in the world of landscape architecture that's become more acknowledged in the last 10-15 years.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious about the inequities, like the sound and the environment and the
Yeah.
trees, but
Yeah, and
it
environmental
is hard to
justice,
hear that.
like, yeah.
It was hard to hear that it's intentional, right? Like
Oh,
that's
it was
rough.
absolutely intentional. I mean, Robert Moses in New York was racist and very intentional about the separating of certain Black communities from what he considered, the better, like, white communities. And then with redlining, I don't know how much you know about
Yeah,
redlining as a
a
zoning
little bit.
practice and
Hmm.
as a practice of giving mortgages to people in better neighborhoods versus other neighborhoods that they deemed not good. And when you look at that and you look at what happened to those neighborhoods over time, it was directly related to those decisions and race. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's great to be honest and name that. And
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
have, it's good to, it's painful to think about. And then also, do you have, just to be in the healing spirit, a story of where,
Yeah.
like an example to get granular, like, okay, and now something like this is happening, you're involved in, or you're aware that's happening
Hmm.
that, helps neighborhoods and communities rebuild their culture in a way that's planned for with love rather than control?
Yeah. A big thing for us, I mean, it comes back to the idea of what we were talking about at the beginning of like what physical elements do we think about in our projects, and gateways and access is something that we're always trying to do well. And then, kind of when we get a project or we're starting a project where we see a lot of barriers like physical fences or big, giant, wide roads that don't have any crosswalks across them, and you have to walk 3,000 feet to cross a road, those are elements that prevent access. And so then we're looking at how do we take those fences down, how do we create more access, more permeability, make things of a scale that feels comfortable as a person as opposed to just a person in a car driving at 40 to 60 miles an hour. That's a big part of our work. I mean, we talk about this a lot in a lot of our um, middle America work, because the car is king, and so everybody wants to drive everywhere, and everybody's moving so fast as compared to moving at the speed of a bike, as we were saying, or at the speed of walking. The scale that you perceive is very different, and so trying to reintroduce a more human scale to spaces that wiped out a human scale. There probably had been a human scale street with appropriately sized buildings at one point that were wiped out and replaced with a giant road. And then big box development came in, and now we're trying to kind of revert back to what we had with a more pedestrian human scale and think about that kind of
Yeah.
first 20 feet of buildings.
Yeah, beautiful. And it really, what is driving home to me right now is that the context building and the I know what it feels like to be overwhelmed in a city or in a urban landscape, and just be like, oh, it's just hard to feel relaxed, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then
Yep.
just
Yep.
like yeah, so fostering nervous systems and how that plays into social differences and social trust,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and helping people. I'm thinking about the Nickerson Gardens right now, where a friend of
Mm.
mine who was on the podcast in Watts in LA, and being there, and just the kind of design of that, and
Hmm.
and how these things play in, and really the imagination and the story and the reimagination of social spaces. So again, I just see that as such a healing thing. I
Yeah.
want to pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
You
Sure.
brought in the idea of process, and I know a lot of people get down on government, especially Middle America, gets down on government and processes, and
Yeah.
just like what's really works in those processes, and where are the hangups? Because it's time
Yeah.
intensive to be collaborative. It's time
Yes. Yeah.
intensive to have like good ethical reviews and planning. So obviously you're on the front lines of those conversations. What would you
Yeah.
say to people of like, I really like this work. I know it's hard work, but I think it's valuable. And if we could do it better and simplify this process, and we approached our work, or approached society building in this way. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I am very much someone who I'm always I come to the middle and think a lot about balance. Like you need regulation, and you need s- like um guardrails on things, because if you don't, the worst of the people are just going to take everything and do make projects only for their own benefit. And I think for us, our intention is to create spaces that are for the benefit of everyone, and truly create spaces where everyone feels like they belong. And if you don't have those guardrails, that will not happen, because we live in a capitalist society, and for better or for worse, there's selfish actors who are going to do things that are only going to benefit their bottom line, and they're not going to be thinking long term. And so for us, our work also, we are always thinking in timeframes of like at least 10 years, if not 50. You plant a tree and we expect it to be there for 30 years. And so we're designing it for the space that it's going to create day one, but then also the space that it's going to create in 30 years. And if you're only thinking about, okay, I'm going to develop a piece of property and flip it in 5 years, that's a very different calculation and related to time and investment and what you're willing to put into a project. That I know that regulation to a certain extent helps create guide rails for folks so that they're not just only thinking about themselves and their own 5-year bottom line. And so
talk about that a little bit
I'm
more. I want to
yeah,
stop there. I'm going to interrupt.
yeah,
Pardon me, but
yeah,
I do
yeah,
want to talk about basically it's like a shadow side of capitalism, where
yeah,
people are self-interested. And so here you are, you and your team.
yeah.
What's Merritt's first name?
Chris
Merritt, Nina Chase. They're doing their projects, and you're encountering people who are trying to make a big dollar on a
Yeah,
project, right? And how
yeah.
that changes the tonality of imagination. Yeah. So
Mm.
is that pretty common that you're running against those forces? Because on one hand, you have the public good, public health, social
Mhm.
spaces, and you have the government trying to manage the public good, but also get the
Yeah.
developers and the business
There
going and the
yeah, th
dance. Yeah.
yeah, I will come back to this idea that it's always a balance because sometimes we work with developers, we work with good developers who I consider good developers who are really
Yeah.
trying to make a positive impact.
Yeah.
And they're up against, they feel that they're up against, government creating rules and restrictions over how much space they need to give for park space, or thinking about how much space they need to allocate on a property for stormwater management and making sure we're not just piping all the stormwater into a river. And so there's always this kind of back and forth. And I think the best projects are where you have people who are very intentional about making positive change and they're understanding why the government regulations and restrictions are in place, because they are for the benefit of not just that project, but for the benefit of everyone. And so we're, I wouldn't say we're always kind of fighting that. I would say we're very lucky to work with clients who get it and they want to do that anyway. And so
Good.
we more often than not, almost always, are having really positive conversations and results related to all of that work. But that's not the case in the world of development at large. I would say, usually, typically, developers are pushing back on regulations because they say it's going to slow development and it's going to keep us from building affordable housing, which is not true. And they're going to push back on that and say we don't want anybody telling us what to do. But it's kind of the basis of so much in America: land ownership and what you can and cannot do on your land. And
Yeah.
living in communities on a variety of scales of who tell you what you can do. Because, on the one, you guys, you're in the San Francisco area. I spent a lot of time in Boston. I would say the level of regulation in the Boston area and California is on the more extreme end of things. And for communities that I know much better in Massachusetts, they've had a hard time building housing. And there's been a lot of not in my backyard, we're not going to densify, we're not going to build housing. And they're having a housing crisis and they need to build more housing. And they need to do that in a managed way with government regulation and willing partners to in order for more housing to get built, because otherwise people aren't going to be able to live there anymore. And there's not going to be just general people, nurses, doctors,
Yeah.
no one's going to be
Yeah.
able to afford anything. Doctors won't be able to afford anything, let alone teachers and nurses and firefighters and everybody, landscape architects. I don't know how that will continue without some sort of major change. But you
Yeah.
have to balance it because there are very real reasons why those restrictions were in place to begin with, and a lot of good environmental thought about that we want to make sure we're not dismantling very sensitive ecosystems, but we also have to be, I don't know, you have to find a good balance.
Yeah, appreciate that. And if you were to improve anything from your point of view, so I actually I'll just back up one sec. I like the tension that maybe in the dialogue of pressures between, okay, these are the regulations and this is, and this is short-term planning, but this is what long-term planning brings. And that it
Yeah.
probably, as I see you as a role as an educator, that part of the role of the landscape architect would be educating developers of like, hey, if we go this way,
Yeah.
these are the social consequences, but if we go this way, these are these social
Hmm.
consequences, and being an
Yeah.
advocate essentially for longer term thinking that's better for the public good. Is that
Yeah.
true? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
especially related to climate change. I know that might be it might seem like a little bit of a pivot, but it's rolled up in all of this because the climate change conversation, if we're only going after short term stuff and thinking about short term bottom lines, the climate change conversation, no one wants to talk about it. But as we know, the climates are changing and we have to be thinking long term, and we can't do this every man for himself strategy, which is how it's playing out right now. Um, that is going to have real implications on where everybody lives and who has access to what in the future. And I spent a good chunk of my early career doing resiliency work. And in the Boston area, in New York and New Jersey, and I remember there was a professor who was on one of our teams, and he was talking about this was post Hurricane Sandy hitting New York and New Jersey, and we were doing some resiliency planning work, and he said, this is really going to be decided by the insurance companies, and this was 15 years ago, and no one was really talking about the insurance companies then, and now everybody's talking about the insurance companies. And like, wildfires in California, like you can't get insurance, and so only people who have their own pots of money can continue to rebuild in very risky places. And near the ocean, it's the same thing in Florida and the Barrier Islands. And it's a really, and it's because of this mentality of like every person for themselves, everybody's figuring it out for themselves. And um it's immediate short-term thinking as opposed to like more collective long-term managed risk, and really understanding the pros and cons of where we're building and why.
Mhm. It's interesting, that prefrontal cortex, that long-term
Yes.
consideration. And
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
talk about that, because I know you're talking about 50 years, and it's like, wow, it's interesting to feel that the forces of, people trying to do good things, insurance, and I'm thinking about, wow, are trees our allies? Like, how much are trees, like at the most tiny space down there on the waterfront, like having that
Yeah.
extra 12 trees, matters at some level,
Yeah. Yeah,
and just,
definitely. Yep.
yeah. Mm.
Oh, it makes a huge, I mean, trees to me are like the biggest element that we have in our toolbox for most things. For shade, because they help cool our environments. And you think about like, especially in Pittsburgh, the big climate risks are heat, and then landslides because we have very steep slopes and we're getting increased rain events. And so trees help keep hillsides intact. They help manage rainwater and stormwater by just sucking up water and keeping it out of the system. Um, and they also help clean our air. So they, they help a
Amazing.
lot.
Amazing. And they calm nervous
And
systems,
so they totally do. I feel like
right?
they're the
It's like,
magic
yeah.
silver bullet for all the issues. Just
Well,
plant some
just to
trees.
tie in the ancient human lineage, right? That
Yeah.
if I believe's not the right word, but I trust the evolution story in terms of the migration
Yeah.
of species across time, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that connection with trees for primates is an ancient one, and
Mhm.
it still matters.
Well, it definitely still matters. And I think our connection to those natural systems really matter. It makes us feel comfortable. And sometimes we may not know why we feel comfortable, but then look at those patterns and you realize that this is a little different and at a like geologic scale, and I've just started thinking about it, so it's a bit of an in process thought. But my husband and I just bought land in West Virginia, in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, and we were doing a scale comparison of the land in West Virginia. We bought 50 acres, which is I truly don't I think I fully understand the scale of the land that we just bought, but it's 50 acres. And so we drew a rectangle of what the property is, and we put that same rectangle over our neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And we realized that the angle of the road that leads to this property in West Virginia runs southwest to northeast. And we realized that our neighborhood, all the roads run southwest to northeast also. And so the sun is always rising over here and setting over here. and it's going to do exactly the same thing on this land in West Virginia. It's going to set over here, right here. And I was like, wow, that's wild that it's like exactly the same. And so, but then I was like, okay, the glaciers receded. They were all kind of moving in a general southwest to northeast direction, like West Virginia, Pittsburgh. They're similar. I get that. And then I was looking at all the other places I've lived in my life, and they all have this orientation. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on? But it's just kind of related to larger geologic effects and I don't know, like very innate qualities of space that I think we follow and feel comfort from. I don't know.
Wow.
So
That's
you should
profound.
go and
That's
map
deep.
your spaces. I don't know. I
I'm
was like, holy
curious.
shit.
Yeah. Is there a how-to on that? Like, is there a website like how to map
I just
spaces?
I mean, I use Google Maps, Google Earth
Yeah. Okay.
Maps,
Just look at it.
and just
Interesting.
don't turn them, don't rotate it. So always keep
Mhm.
north up,
Okay.
um,
Cool.
and then just see. I'm curious, and so I told my dad this. My dad's a big naturalist, and he has always had small boats, and he sails. And he was like, this reminds me of lobsters. They follow the movement of sand on the ocean floor, which did not know, like with ocean currents moving the sand, and that's how they like they migrate. They like follow the
Yeah.
sand.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, we're deeply connected, and it
Yeah,
makes sense that there are underpinnings that define our sense of home and our sense of belonging and our connection, from
yeah,
trees to
yeah,
sunrise, sunset orientation.
yeah, yeah,
And I like that. That feels real. And I guess I'm just hopeful. I'm hopeful that I know there's so
yeah,
much static in the political culture, but speaking with you today, I feel like hopeful that like there are good people like yourself and Chris who are redefining who we can be in the web,
mm,
in a with better relationships, with healthier relationships, with more equity, and I
mm-hmm.
really appreciate that. It's powerful.
Um,
You think that's happening?
thank you.
Yeah.
I do. I think it is happening, and I like to think that to my point that there aren't enough landscape architects. If there's anyone out there getting inspired by this, please become a landscape architect because we need more people doing this work. But it's a very small profession, and so I think more people who are trained in this way and study with
Yeah.
people and work and learn how
Yeah.
we kind of tick. I want more people to think this way and have a physical impact on their communities.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. This has been
Thank
amazing.
you.
I
Oh,
honestly
this has been so
I have
fun.
like 7 more questions, but I feel like we've arrived at a really nice place. Thinking
Yeah,
about the
thank
future, and it
you.
reminds me of a quote that I always loved. I think it's a Greek proverb that like wisdom or an elder is someone who plants trees in the shade that they don't expect to sit. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
so
It's
I
not for
feel
you. It's for, yeah, yeah.
it's for who? It's for tomorrow.
Somebody else in the
Yeah.
future. You don't even know
Yeah.
who they are. Yeah, but it's not for you. I think that's like core to the work we do. Yeah.
Say more about that for a minute. Tell me more with that, how that truth of
I
being with this is about me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it to the directly it's to plant like with a tree being planted, you're planting it for a future generation to really enjoy the like once it gets really big and the comfort and the space that that creates. And so I think there's an inherent selflessness to that that you may not see the benefits of this thing, but you understand
Yeah.
its impact over a
Yeah.
longer period of time. I mean, and that goes
Is
back
that
to what we were just
emotional?
talking
Is
about.
that emotional for you to have that
Yeah,
relationship in
I
your
think
life?
a lot. Yeah, I mean, uh, uh, I think about who came before us. I think about who's going to be here after us. We just found out we got this big project in Pittsburgh that I can't talk about yet, but it is one of the most significant cultural landscapes in Pittsburgh. And the history that it has had, I cannot believe that we are going to be part of shaping what comes next for it. And it's just been an enormous point of crossing and confluence and like I that is before us, like also not for us, like, and then what comes next, like, we're a tiny blip in that whole timeline, but to help shape what comes next, I'm so thrilled, and I feel very lucky, and yeah, I think that's part of that work is like you plant that tree now when it's not for you, it's for other people later.
Well said. I'm happy for you. And I
Well,
really feel the humility and the giftedness and the relatedness in how you're living your work. This is profound, and I love highlighting it. I think this is so great. I think so many people are going to love this show. So, Nina,
well,
thank
I
you
really
so much for
appreciate it.
being on
Thank
the
you
show
for
today.
the invitation, and to Ben for
And
thinking
to
that this would be a
Ben.
good connection. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to
Great.
stop the
Thank
recording.
you.
Cool. Okay, let's see. Can I hit stop? I can hit stop. Let's see where it stops.
That's
There.
okay.